If you're a fan of thrillers, today we have author RJ Beam here. He is a real life police officer and he's bringing a world of knowledge to his series, which may or may not involve some of your favorite TV-esque topics. Today we are talking all about the Officer Stuart Thompson mysteries, and we're going to be chatting with author RJ Beam. RJ, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Tell us a little bit about what you write.
So I write police procedural thrillers. So my stories typically have two point of views, both the officer and the criminal. So I spend more time, I think, or I enjoy my time more, I should say, writing the bad guys than the cops. I really dig in to why this person is committing their crimes or what's going on in their mind, not just that they're a crazy killer for the sake of being a crazy killer, but there's a method to their madness. And so then how is it that my officer can figure out what this is, or what is it that is the clue that gets them, which sometimes is something as simple as the fact that the bad guy forgot one minor detail, and so we're talking about planning their crime and then executing it, and there's always that one thing they forget, so that allows my hero to then be the hero.
And I love that you go dual point of view with this. So we actually kind of get to see both sides. And a lot of stories do not do that. So the fact that you were able to kind of encompass both the hero and the villain is a very interesting take on your stories. So before we get into this, tell us a little bit about what Fire Cop is about.
Fire Cop is it, it actually comes out of a conversation I actually had with some coworkers where we made a joke about the fact that we had somebody in town that we didn't have a reason to arrest them, and somebody just made a joke about the fact that give me a gallon of gasoline and a highway flare and they'll leave town. And we chuckled about it, and then of course we all chuckled about the fact that God forbid anything like a fire happened at this person's house, because now we'd all just implicated ourselves.
Right.
And that just kind of was the impetus. I kept thinking about that story, and I kept saying how I wanted to write a book, and I'm like, well, there's my book. What if we have an officer that does actually act on that joke and begin setting fires to drug dealers' houses, that, hey, we can't make arrests on these drug dealers, so we'll just burn down their houses. And so essentially you have, I hate to say it, but cop versus cop in some respects. So you have the one officer being the vigilante, and then you have the other officer who's investigating. And then what, of course, the moral implications of when that officer figures out that the vigilante is actually a fellow officer. What did they do? Did they make the arrest? And no spoilers.
And I absolutely love that. I just listened to a podcast episode where a police officer actually was at fault for a murder, and they kind of took us behind the scenes of what would happen in that case. And so I like that you kind of get to explore that in your story as well. And of course, because you are a real life professional public safety officer, you know a lot about the behind the scenes and the procedures and what actually goes on. So how did this influence your writing?
It influenced it a lot because I did spend some time in college as a volunteer firefighter as a way to beef up my resume when I wanted to become an officer. So, having the ability to make my lead character not only a police officer, but I have them in a really small town. So they don't have all the resources. They don't have a drug task force. They don't have a SWAT team. They don't have all the stuff that you see on TV. And so he wears both hats. He is a volunteer firefighter and he is a police officer. And so he's going to the scenes, kind of an easy way to get him as a point of view character and not add extra point of views. But he's going in and he's helping put out the fire. And because he sees things as an officer, he realizes it's arson. And so then he becomes the person who's the investigator and does all the CSI work. So it kind of makes him one point of view character, but he gets to wear two hats. Yeah. And of course, too, I get to geek out a little bit on some of my CSI stuff. That's, my primary duty is being an evidence tech. And so that's something I really like to be able to bring into my stories and talk about some things that you may not normally see on TV or normally don't hear about because they're not really cool skills. They're cool for us, but they're just don't look great on TV and movies, or most authors don't know to write about them.
Well, and it's very interesting because you've been on an episode of our Experts for Authors show where you actually take us behind the scenes on what Hollywood maybe gets wrong inside of the industry, and you give us some really good tips and places to look to make sure we're doing our research for our stories a little bit more accurately and authentically. So if you have not seen that episode, we'll link that down below. Make sure you check that out as well. But I really like that you're able to create a character that is so multidimensional, because it's not just police work, it is also that firework as well. And then, of course, you get to bring in the CSI skills on top of that inside of your story. And so, as you're developing your characters, what is your methodology for creating your main characters? Tell me a little bit about who these people are and what you did to build them.
Well, you know, I don't want to say that the main character has anything to do with me, but obviously, because he wears both hats, he probably is an idealized version of me, of like who I wish I could be. As it relates to a couple of his personality traits, he doesn't have some of my flaws. He might have some other flaws, but whatever the case may be. Um, there's also some mix of some people I know that boy, I wish I had that wit, or I wish I could have said these kinds of things in these situations. So he's got a little bit of that. Some of the other characters, there's some folks who I worked with that I really enjoyed, like the one sergeant in the book, the one supervisor. I worked with one really great supervisor, and I worked with another supervisor who was pretty good. I never got to work with him per se. He was always on a different shift, but I always respected that person. So I kind of mushed them together and made it kind of a mix of the personality of the guy I worked with all the time, but the temperament of the person who I knew and respected. Not that the person I worked with didn't have a good temper, but he could be a little bit of a hothead from time to time. And even like the drug dealers, there was a couple of those people who I thought about, some folks that I've dealt with over the years, like this person and this other criminal, and kind of took aspects of them and smushed them together a little bit. And then also just made up some things also, like, okay, if I were to be a drug dealer, how would I do it? If
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but if to be a good investigator, you got to be a little bit of a criminal too. We always say you got to think dirty. You got to think dirty. So, if I wanted to get away with this, if I were going to try and be a successful person in this criminal field, what would I do? And so I kind of mushed a little bit of that in with these characters.
And of course, you get to explore all of these things through your writing. Earlier, you mentioned that you kind of like writing the villain's perspective inside of your stories. So, as we are introducing your book to potential readers, what do we need to know about your lead hero and your lead villain?
Well, to start off, they're pretty good friends. They started at the police department within about a year of each other. So the main character is junior to the antagonist, our vigilante. So he kind of looks up to that other officer, and they've got a pretty good friendship. They went through a lot of the same stuff together as rookies, and of course, now we end up with a situation where one has got to suspect the other of doing something. No spoilers again, but from a hero standpoint, because obviously this is Stuart Thompson Mysteries, and I've got 5 books written in this series. Only 2 are published. One's coming out here very soon. Just putting the last edits on it. But yeah, he's a young officer, and that's some of the best feedback I've gotten from people. This guy is 23 years old. He's not a rookie. He's been on the force for a couple of years at this point, but he's not jaded. He's not an alcoholic. He's not burnt out. He's still very idealistic. He still has that youthful enthusiasm. The fact that there are times where supervisors have to tell him, "Whoa, slow down. You're doing too much. You need to go home. You need to take some time off. Go spend some time with your girlfriend," and those kinds of things, which is going to be an interesting character arc, because as I go through the books, there are some incidences that happen to him, this being one of them, that does kind of put that edge on him, that makes him a little less trusting of people, and that starts to make him not become the jaded, cynical cop. I hate that trope. I understand why it's out there, but I hate that trope that not every officer has to be a diehard alcoholic. But he starts getting involved more in work things and stuff to throw himself into not sitting at home alone or not dealing with things in his personal life that aren't, I don't want to go out and drink. I don't want to do these things. So he starts getting involved in some other aspects. And so I've kind of got this arc going as you go from book to book, and each book is standalone, so you don't have to know the backstory, because a couple of little things that are said, it's easy to understand. But it's yeah, it's a different take on that officer starting younger in his career, and as this series progresses, we'll start seeing him getting older and maybe becoming more jaded, or maybe having some redemption. We'll see.
I love that. I love that we see the progression throughout the stories as well. I feel like when we jump into things like TV shows and some book series, we see a very specific point with that conversation along the progression of their profession. And if we are not going to be able to kind of grow with them, it kind of leaves us in that one specific location. So I like that you're taking us through the progression of what they are doing and then showing us how he's going to be growing. So I have to ask, because I know one of the really cool things that could potentially happen is seeing how he's going to cope in the future. And I know one thing that you love to do is to educate online. You love to get on TikTok, you love to tell stories, you love to show us the behind the scenes of these things. So could we potentially be seeing some of that growth in his story as well?
Definitely. We're going to see some progression within his career as it relates to going to some training and taking on some additional responsibilities at his agency. There may be some PTSD things, and talking about the adequate resources that agencies have for officers with PTSD, and things that should be done with officers when they are having. And it's not always PTSD. Sometimes it's what we oftentimes experience is what's called emotional fatigue, where we're just spending so much time out there in the public, and trying to be empathetic with folks, not sympathetic but empathetic, and that starts to grate on you, and it gets to that point where you get home, and you don't want to make any decisions, you don't want to feel anything, you just want to shut off, and some of those aspects too, where there are some positive ways of dealing with that, and whatnot. So I'm going to try to be more on those positive sides, and do some little education there, as that it's not always the negative aspects of the job, but sometimes you need to have that push to get into those positive mindsets.
And it's so fun to explore these things through our writing. So do you feel like this is a way for you to kind of learn more about your profession and the people that you're working with around you? Do you feel like this is a great way to explore it, or is this kind of your escape from all of that?
It's my escape. It's almost like my therapy. It really is. Uh, I'd started writing Fire Cop years ago. I had an outline for it, and I kind of put it on the back burner for a while. I'm sure lots of authors have the same story, that it probably took 10 years to get that first book written, right? I probably only had maybe 2 or 3 chapters done. I didn't have a really good outline. I didn't understand story structure. And then I got an injury, and I was off work. I had surgery. I was off work for a couple of months, and I had nothing to do. And that really was the impetus where, hey, I've got time, figure this out. And it really kept me in a great headspace, and it was very therapeutic. And it made me, it gave me a reason to get into contact with some of the coworkers, because that's something that happens in law enforcement. When you're not at work, you start losing contact with some of your coworkers. I mean, yes, people stop by, it's human nature. But to give me a reason to go into the PD and sit there and listen to the sounds, and hear the radio, and some of those things that you just can't capture. You can explain in a story, but if you're sitting in the environment and you're thinking about it, it creates something more that you can put there on the page. So it gave me that reason to just, hey, instead of sitting on that couch, I'm going to go into the PD and just sit and hang out at shift change, chill with some of my coworkers, chew the fat, and then, I'm going to go back home. I'm not going to sit there all day. And that just kind of it just kept the fingers on the keyboard. And next thing you know, I had a book, and then I had no clue what to do with it. So then I had to figure out how to get how to get a publishing contract. So it kept me busy.
There you go. And I love that it gave you a reason to keep going and to stay in touch with all of these people. And speaking of reasons, I want to know, what are the top reasons that people should be jumping in and reading your story?
Well, number one, every book is different. Don't get me wrong, but it's different than most of your cop books. It's a younger officer, and it's somebody who doesn't know everything, and so you're going to see an officer make mistakes, and they're going to get disciplined, and they're going to have to figure out their process and figure out what they're doing in their job. Another reason is it's probably one of the more true and accurate books out there. I'm biased, I know, but quite frankly, when you think about the fact that I'm not talking about whiz-bang technology that doesn't exist, and I've got real timelines in there. Things take time. You send stuff to the crime lab, maybe you get a response, maybe you don't. And it's just some of those realities of the setbacks. And while I try to be upbeat, there's some darkness in there. If you like a little bit of darkness and you enjoy that bit of yeah, like not every ending is as happy as you would think, or even those middle parts where it gets a little bit like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? I think I've hit that nail on the head, and I've been told by more than one person that it definitely was that kind of a ride where you didn't know what was going to happen next, and you kept thinking, oh, this is not going to turn out good. And yeah.
We love books with a bit of darkness. So friends, if you are excited to read Fire Cop, we're going to link that down below for you. You want to make sure that you are checking this out. Where can everybody find a copy of your story?
It is on Kindle Unlimited, so Amazon. There's an audiobook version out there, so it's on Audible. And I believe some of the print copies have popped up on, Barnes & Noble and the other places. But the ebook is exclusive to Amazon due to the KDP contract.
Gotcha. And where can everybody connect with you online?
I'm fairly easy to find. My website's Premeditated Fiction. And otherwise, if you just Google RJ Beam author, that I'm always the top first search result. But otherwise, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, RJ_Beam will get you to my pages.
And make sure that you are checking out RJ's episode of Experts for Authors. We're going to link that down below as well. And if you've got an author you would like to see on our show, make sure you let us know, give them a tag, give them a shout out, and we'll see about getting more of these fabulous authors just like RJ on the show so that you can learn a little more about their stories. RJ, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.